Congratulations on that wonderful movie. It's a great work of art.
Thank you.
To start with, during our previous conversation, you had told me that you worked 4 years on this documentary. But when you just started as a process of documenting your village life for your children to show how your village must have looked 20 years back. So can you just, to start with, tell us about the whole process, how it started and when it triggered that, okay, now it's a documentary material?
Firstly, good morning, everybody. Well, this is my first film, so I wasn't really a filmmaker before this, and I don't really consider myself to be a filmmaker even now. This just happened to be something that I felt very closely about. I grew up in the village of Kurturi, and growing up in the village of Kurturi, the agrarian culture of the village is so upfront and close to all of us. We can't ignore the fields or the agrarian life. And I got to a point wherein in fact, if any of you have been to Kurturi and you enter Kurturi, you will be welcomed by green fields, because that's the topography of the village. And it got to a point wherein I started to notice that a lot of these fields were now, which I took for granted that they would be always cultivated, started to remain bare. And I think initially, what sort of disturbed me was not really the fact that people were not growing fields, but it was just the visual that had changed. It was no longer that lush green village that I was looking at or expecting. So what I did was I took my camera and decided to just record what was happening, more so just for myself and my family, because by then I already had 2 daughters, and I decided to record for them what was going on in the village, because I thought maybe there could come a day where this would not be, this occupation may not be as closely practiced as it is today. And I said, I'm just going to keep this as a part of my documents, my family documents. So one day if my children have questions about the village or about rice or about agriculture, I'm just going to give this to them and say, somewhere in this hard drive, you will find your answers. And that's how it started. But what I didn't know was that I actually had stepped into a project which would take me 4 years. And I thought I would stop 6 months later, but then I realized that it was a pressing matter, and there were too many angles in the story that needed to kind of be looked at. And one thing led to another, and 4 years or close to 5 years later, I ended up with this film. At which point in time does a project which you're just doing to document turn into something serious is very hard to put a finger on. I don't think there was a particular time wherein I said, okay, now, but it's just a feeling. I was just going by my intuitive feelings, because I had no technical background in the area, so I was just going guided completely by how I felt about it.
So does your background in music helped in a way to put this film together? Because now when I'm looking at the second time, I gave more importance to the music, and I found it was quite gelling well with the whole film as such. So how did the music come in? Like, even the women singers, farmers. So it's very interesting how you blend it all in.
I think as it was evolving, my ideas started to flow. And because I have a background in music and I have a background in audio engineering, that definitely helped me, because I understood the textures of sound. And I also understood that, so one of the things that I wanted to do was so the songs that you hear in the film were songs that were actually sung once upon a time when women were working in the fields, and a lot of these songs were now forgotten. So I had to go back and find the women in the village that could remember some of these songs, and then put them through a sort of a practice session wherein they went through a couple of weeks of meeting and practicing and remembering these songs. And then I was able to go and record them, because a lot of these songs are now forgotten. Women are not singing these songs in the fields, and also because a lot of, back in the day, the agrarian culture was such that because people lived in joint families, everybody worked together in these families, and as a result, they had this close symbiotic sort of relationship with each other. But now, because we have labor that comes in from outside the village, a lot of the songs and it's a conversation, so a lot of these conversations have died out. So I had to go back in and revive those songs and record them. Yeah.
So how was the response of farmers, like when you went to document, and were they like welcoming, or were they like asking you like, why are you here? Like, what is your motive behind this?
Yeah, good. Interesting, because initially when I showed up in the field, fields with my camera, they were all wondering what I was doing there. And especially the women in the village were not used to seeing somebody come and be so close recording, right? So they looked at me with suspicion first, and then after that they thought I was just mad. So
called you piso, apparently.
Yeah, so when I would show up in the field, they would say to us, "O piso elo purtun," So, but I think after some time they kind of got used to the fact of seeing me repeatedly. They didn't understand what I was doing. In fact, to be honest, I didn't understand myself. I just knew I was documenting it. But, they repeatedly saw me coming there, and then they slowly warmed up to me. And I think that you've built a certain level of trust when they start giving you tea and sharing their breakfast and giving you lunch, and, then you know that you're a part of the community, of the farming community.
Also, from being from the same village helped, I think. They knew who you are.
A lot, yeah.
Also, in these 4 years, you must have personally seen the changes happening in the field, like, in terms of climate or environment. Like, can you elaborate a little more on that? Because it's a very important topic when it comes to farming.
So I think in the 4 years that I started documenting the stuff, I would have to say that when I finished, towards the end of it, the changes were actually more positive than negative. So I saw that there was, you would think that by the end of it, there were more people that were actually leaving it, but that was not true. I saw that there was a little bit more organization, and then there were a lot more people that were taking interest in the farming, in the rice cultivation. This last, even though it's non-contextual to the period that I finished the film in, but this year we had a really intense monsoon period where a lot of farmers around Goa, rice cultivators, lost their crops. But Kurturi was one of the villages which had the least amount of damage. It's purely because, and especially this area, it's because of the methodology of cultivation and the way that they have maintained their fields and the way that they were able to minimize the damage, So I would say that from those 4 years from when I started, there was a period that got really bad in between, which was again affected by weather because the rains didn't come in time. But when I finished, it seemed like it was more positive.
So were the farmers more aware about their surroundings, because they also point out how they are more united compared to other Goan farmer community in a way? Are they more aware about the land they are dealing with?
I wouldn't say that. I think that basically what happens in this area is that, if at all, they are more organized. The organization, and they have a very tight system of organization, and they're very respectful to the organization, which is why it keeps them going. And I think the other thing that helped them was that the introduction of technology. So for example, the combine harvester and now the transplanter has changed a lot. It's making it more viable. The reason why they could not was because of financial reasons, So it's making it more viable.
Your documentary also speaks about biotechnologist Shilpa Bhosle, who is working on the indigenous varieties of rice. How you happen to meet her? Like, is she experimenting also in Kurturi village with the rice varieties?
No, she's not experimenting in Kurturi, but she's written a very valuable book, which I think it's a very, very valuable book for Goans and for an understanding our rice heritage. It's called Rice of Goa. And she's done a lot of documentation to understand the different varieties of seeds. And her lab, which I call it a lab, but the place which is in the film is one of the only places in Goa wherein she's got over 65 varieties of rice, wherein some are local and some are where even the government today, we don't have some of the old, what we call heritage or heirloom seeds. What we are growing today is a lot of hybridized seeds. And if we want to understand our own, just like how we try to understand our roots in terms of our families and our ancestors and all, if we want to understand where our rice comes from and what our ancestry is with rice, then she's the only person in Goa that has the ability to explain that to us. I only met her, or I came to know because while I was researching it, I understood of her work and I came across the book and then I reached out to her. Yeah.
You also mentioned that you would like to continue collect such farming stories from Goa. So have you started this process? Have you collected any such interesting stories from Goa related to farming?
As a result of the film coming out, I keep getting contacted by people from all across Goa and what I've realized is that almost every person who comes to a screening has a farming story, because either their parents were farmers, or their grandparents were farmers, or their neighbors were farmers, and each one in their memory has some sort of interesting farming story. It's not like I got up one day and I went out there and filmed this. It's because my father was growing fields, my grandfather was growing, and then there was a huge break. I grew up in the environment of looking at what was happening. I grew up with people growing fields. I grew up being a part of all of it, and then for a while stopping, So it's just the fact that as a child, I have my own memories of farming. That's what motivated me also in many ways. And I think that like that, everyone here and outside also has some sort of a very powerful farming story. They remember their grandfather or their grandmother or their aunts, their uncles waking up in the morning, going to the fields, making kanji, eating the, so everyone has different farming memories.
Okay, and last question, you had told last time that you couldn't screen this movie for these local farmers. Have you managed to do that now?
Actually, I have screened in bits and pieces, but not as much as I would like to. I'm still waiting to do like a proper screening because it's really hard, I've realized, working with the farming community. My film is not a priority to them. Yes. So they have other things going on, and hopefully at some point in time, I will, they always say, okay, come and contact us during the holidays, but when I go there, then there's something else going on. But yeah, hopefully.
Okay, now the floor is open for questions. Anybody has any questions to Vince?
Thank you. I really loved this film so much, and I think it's such a wonderful piece of art to share with young people, to bring attention to so many issues about Goan life and the environment. I'm wondering how you've been able to share it with young people, and whether you think the comunidad has a role to play in Goa in educating young people about these issues.
The first part is how have I been able to share it. The effort that has been made to share the film mostly with young people is through the education system, through screenings in schools and colleges and opening dialogues from that perspective. The idea for me now is, because the film is still in certain festivals, I have restrictions on how much I can screen the film. But my goal at some point in time, mid next year, is to be able to make the film available to people across the world on a streaming channel like YouTube or something, with no restrictions, because I think that the film should be watched. It was made also because I wanted people to watch it and learn a little bit and interact and understand what's going on. Because even though it's shot in Kurturi is like a microcosm in a macro. So basically what happens in Kurturi happens in other villages of Goa as well. There are lots of similarities, you know. So the idea is to then open the film up so then anyone can watch it and share it. Comunidad, in terms of its ability to work with younger people, I would have to say I don't think that's I don't know how much that can happen, because their area of expertise or their area of responsibility or what they think is different. Back in the day it may have been, but today I'm a bit skeptical. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add that one key person who you interviewed, the miller, had said
Yeah.
something around the importance of young people, because he almost said that young people have been negligent about agriculture, and yet you evidenced that they were involved in agriculture, and we know from the global movement that it's young people who are at the forefront.
And I think that it would be also kind of a little bit too harsh to say that to write young people off. We must understand why young people are not necessarily attracted to agriculture is because, first of all, it doesn't pay bills, okay? So if agriculture was something that could pay your bills at the end of the day and become financially viable, then I think people. And the second thing is, what I learned spending a lot of time in the agrarian community was that at a very fundamental level, the upper classes or the upper castes have shamed in many ways the farming community. So there's a lack of pride. And if there's lack of pride, why would the younger people want to do something where they don't feel proud? In fact, that's what the girl says, right? That they want to kind of dismantle or dislocate themselves from this thing so that the identity is changed, so that they don't have to bear the stigma. So it's stigmatized in a way. So I think it's a bit harsh to say that I think young people, given a chance with technology, given a chance with, awareness and all of that. Because at the end of the day, this is really not about young people, and it's really not about the classes and the castes. It's about, we're going to get to a point where this is going to be about survival. And at that point in time, no one's really going to care. Whether it's cool, whether it's money, whether it's whatever. If you're hungry, you're going to do it,
Any other questions? We have time for one more. Well,
I think there's a gentleman there in the blue shirt. Did he raise his hand?
No, he
No.
raised his camera. I wanted to ask you how have your children received the film? Have they watched it yet? And
Yeah, my kids are actually, they're still young in the sense of like 7, 5 and that age group. But the thing is, they grew up with this film. So they've watched it not once, they've watched it multiple times, and they spend a lot of time in the fields, I spent a lot of time growing up in the fields, so they're spending a lot of time running in the fields, growing up in the fields, understanding the connection between themselves and the agrarian, just in contact with the down-to-earth field vibe.
it really gives a sense of a really beautiful project that touched your life in different ways. And thank you so much for bringing it here and sharing with us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Arti.